What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 160. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, including the Iran nuclear deal, the U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan, and some developments in Ethiopia. So, a lot of news to cover on today's show. Be sure to share it. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show and the daily news roundup that I write. You can also find the show. The video version is posted at YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. We post the audio version anywhere you can listen to podcasts. We post the show on the blog at antiwar.com. And then you can also find the show on any of our social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. The Twitter handle is @con_interest. You can support the show on Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are in the show notes page, as well as the information for any crypto donations. We're more than willing to take Bitcoin as well. Another way you could help the show is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is the home to a great selection of CBD products. They're all high quality. They got their lab tested results right there on their website. If you're new to CBD, they have a nice education tab where you can find out how CBD may be able to help you. I really like their topicals. I use their sports cream all the time. It works fantastic. It works quick. It lasts a long time. And it's got a nice, refreshing menthol smell. But I'm sure you can find something to help you at Paloma Verde. Go again, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Just use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. That gets you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. All right, now let's get into the show. And the first story we have today is an update on the U.S. drone strike in Kabul on August 29th. The strike, of course, we now know killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, and it doesn't seem like anybody involved in the strike had anything to do with ISIS, and potentially this was a huge mistake on the part of the Pentagon. We're now getting some new details reported through the New York Times about this that do seem to indicate that this was a huge mistake on the part of the Pentagon, and again, a pile of dead children now. So what they say happened is the drone footage witnessed a car pull into a ISIS, what the Pentagon believed was a ISIS safe house. The car was driven, this is identified by people on the ground, not the Pentagon, by Zamari Admiri, and Admiri, again, pulls his car into this place the U.S. says ISIS hideout. They say they witness on their drone footage 3 men carry what they say are heavy packages. I guess 3 packages carried by men. It didn't say exactly how many were carried into the car. They say they could tell the packages were heavy by the way that they were carried. I don't exactly know what that means. This is what, again, is being reported from the Pentagon. And then they say that the preliminary analysis was that it was possible to probable that there were explosives in the vehicle. Not sure what changes that, but as he drives through Kabul, I guess he's surveilled and pulls into what the U.S. calls an unknown compound, which is really just his family home. I guess once he pulls the car into the courtyard, a lot of the children, as well as I believe maybe his brother, come out to meet him, and that's when the drone strike, the drone is fired. The U.S. says that it was fired when they only witnessed one person, but then other people entered the area, and that's what caused them to die. They're also pushing this narrative of a secondary explosion, basically trying to vaguely imply that this person was a terrorist and it wasn't the American bomb that killed these kids, but rather his terrorist bomb. We just killed the terrorists, our bombs only do good. It was really setting off his bomb, which shouldn't have been there, that killed the children. There's absolutely no proof of that, and yet it's being amplified and often talked about as the potential true story in the mainstream media right now. So I think that's most of the details that I have on this story from the Pentagon. I guess a couple things to add is that Again, this is from Afghan sources. The neighbors say that this Admiri was not ISIS-K, and he actually worked for a California-based charity. This is like one of the NGO workers that a couple weeks ago the media was saying it needs to prioritize these Afghans getting out of the country, and now he's been killed by a U.S. bomb. Likewise, I believe his brother, but an adult male relative is reported to have been a member of the Afghan National Armed Forces in some capacity. It wasn't exactly clear to me if that was just like a policeman, a natural soldier, or what. But again, these are people that the U.S. Up to a couple weeks ago was talking about prioritizing getting out of the country. And after one of their U.S. drone strikes killed them, there's now a whole lot of care for their lives. Then, of course, if these people were, say, killed by the Taliban, like this guy, his brother, and his children were slaughtered by the Taliban, that would probably be front page news and talked about as how we have to re-intervene in Afghanistan to prevent atrocities like this. I think that's again, most of the details I have. I don't think it's hard to judge, especially seeing the results now. From the hindsight perspective, that was obviously wrong to hit the button. But I think from the information that even the Pentagon is giving us at this point, saying that they thought it was an ISIS location, they thought they loaded heavy packages. Well, I guess they thought they loaded something in the car. They thought it was bombs, and that gave them justification to carry out this drone strike, is the same exact bad, flawed logic and intelligence the U.S. has been using to murder innocent Afghans for years and chalk their deaths up as killing members of the insurgency, which in this case is even happening somewhat when you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, calling this strike righteous, and the White House spokesperson, and this has been backed up by the White House overall, calling the strike successful. And so even though there's no evidence of it, they're just going to go ahead and chalk this up as we prevented a terrorist attack. And this is essentially the flawed logic that has let the U.S. murder Afghans to the hundreds of thousands for the past 20 years, and declare ourselves the morally correct people and the people who could help Afghanistan to improve. It's just so clearly not the case. All right, so that's what I have on the drone strike. Moving on to talk about the Panjshir Valley now, where go back to Monday's show. Will Porter updated us where there was a resistance of some thousands former Afghan National Army soldiers, as well as maybe some local militias, who have teamed up under the banner of mostly Massoud being the leader, but also the former vice president of Afghanistan, Saleh, and they were going to put up a resistance fight against the Taliban. The Taliban have now claimed victory and do have some evidence to show that they hold a lot of the key locations in the Panjshir Valley. That being said, while Massoud seems to have fled the battlefield, his fighters are remaining active in the region and carrying out, I guess, at least claimed by him, different fighting. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if there are some people in this region who essentially, fight a insurgency against the Taliban, that they're just members of the local occupation. And so it's not necessarily that all these people can be defeated on the battlefield, and the Taliban could find themselves making maybe on a smaller scale a similar fall to what the U.S. had made in Afghanistan over 20 years if it tries to come down with a heavy handed military approach in the Panjshir Valley. But again, according to the Taliban, this has been defeated. This prompted the Taliban to announce their new government. I will say that Massoud has doubled down today, saying that they're still looking, and he's trying to rally people to support to fight them. As far as I understand, both Massoud and Saleh are still in Afghanistan, although I'm not sure where, and seeing how their open rebellion to the Taliban regime that now controls Afghanistan, I would assume that things won't be too good for them if they are captured. All right, I'm going to do more of a breakdown on the Taliban's new government, but I just want to mention some of the key names in it. I'm trying to, collect more information on who all these people are. If you look at any media on this, the big thing that people are bringing up is that there's former Guantanamo Bay detainees as part of this government. The best I could tell is that, it's not like this is somebody who was a number two to Osama bin Laden or even in Al Qaeda, who are now members of the Taliban government, but rather members of the Taliban who were tortured at our secret prison at Guantanamo Bay. And the real outrage the media should have is that these people were unjustly tortured, not that they're now a part of the Taliban government. Not that it necessarily makes them good people that they were tortured in Guantanamo Bay, or in any way makes me think that they'll be good rulers. It's just, it's not some kind of indictment that they're Al Qaeda terrorists, as the media is implying with it. So the new head of the government, which the Taliban says is temporary and that they will install a more formal government at some point, although I don't think they're promising to hold elections or anything like that. His name is Mullah Hassan Akhund. I'm not sure anything about him. The Reuters article just says that he is an associate of the founders, late founders, the Taliban's late founder, Mullah Omar. Now, I also read a different article on Akhund that was an absolute hit piece saying that, nobody actually knows his age. They expect him to be around 60, but that, the opening paragraph is, this is a man with steel gaze and look how dangerous he is and everything like that. I don't know if that's really accurate or not. I guess up until this week, really from August 15th up until now, the guy who was kind of the highest ranking Taliban in Afghanistan, Mullah Baradar, is going to be the head of the movement's political office, which I'm guessing is going to be like a foreign minister or secretary of state or something like that, which seems to be an adept move by the Taliban leadership, as he has, shown his ability to negotiate with the Americans. And of all the negative things to bring out about the Taliban announcing their council here and some of the bad things about it, I guess one good thing is it seems they do want to keep him in a position of negotiation. Sirajuddin Haqqani, who's now ahead of the Haqqani network. His father was the founder of the Haqqani network, and this was like a part of the Taliban that fought against the U.S. occupation. He is designated by the United States as a terrorist and was appointed to be the interior minister of Afghanistan. His uncle was also named to a position in the new Taliban cabinet. We also have Mullah Mohammed Yaqumbad. He is the son of Mullah Omar and has been named the defense minister. And then Mullah Akhundzada is going to remain the leader of the Taliban. I'm not quite sure how power is going to be divided. We're still learning a lot, but this is the public statement from the Taliban, so I want to break down some of the big names there. Now, in response to this, there were street protests in Kabul. They didn't seem very large, but there were people out in the streets. The Taliban fired gunfire into the air to deter the protests and get people to go home. As far as I could tell, nobody died at the protests, so there really weren't any conflicts between the people and the Taliban. Moving on, the U.S. There are a couple statements from a couple people in Afghanistan on this, including Atta Mohammed Noor, who is the leader of one party, saying that this only has Taliban representation, and is kind of an indication that the Taliban were lying when they said they wanted like women in government and a more representative government. And that certainly does seem to be a representation, a fair criticism of these appointments by the Taliban. Long term, I guess, it's still yet to be seen what the Taliban rule is going to be like. But if you're, looking to read some maybe fig leaves about what could be happening in Afghanistan, this does seem to be an indicator that they aren't quite as inclusive as they've been saying publicly. All right, now moving on. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the future of U.S. and Taliban relations will depend on Taliban actions. Now, in a way, this does make sense. I don't want the U.S. to have a close relationship with the Taliban government if they are terrible on women's rights, and I didn't want the U.S. to have a closer relationship with the previous Afghan government because of how terrible they were on, different rights and corruption and everything like that. But at the same time, I think what we're talking about here really is whether or not the U.S. is going to sanction the Taliban government and Afghanistan as a whole because of it. And that I oppose no matter how the Taliban react, because if you put sanctions on Afghanistan, it's only going to hurt the people. There's also a lot of hypocrisy in all of this. The U.S. just carried out a drone strike in Kabul that killed 10 people and isn't even remotely concerned about holding anybody accountable or having any discussions about, if somebody should be arrested or charged for the murder of these people. And yet, we're going to expect the Taliban to uphold these rights that we don't even uphold. One of the reasons why the recognition could be important and it's worth talking about is, there's this current situation on the ground in Afghanistan that's really, really dangerous. And while I don't support international aid, look, I'm a libertarian on that, pulling all the aid out from Afghanistan at once, seizing all the country's bank accounts and everything like that, as the U.S. has done, could really throw the country into a major collapse. And, maybe there does needs to be a major restructuring of the Afghan economy. And I understand, like Austrian economists, so that, it may be that there needs to be some kind of, correction in the market, which doesn't involve some kind of downturn. However, we're talking about a country where a lot of people live on less than $2 a day, live in absolute poverty, low literacy rates. The U.S. has absolutely wrecked this country for the past 20 years. So for that reason, I think is a need for at least an extended, right now, period of time to continue to provide some aid and at least allow the Taliban to access some of the accounts that were controlled by the Afghan government, if only, to try to figure out how you're going to pay people who are a large percentage of the country is on the government payroll because of the way the U.S. had, handled our occupation and basically, was paying everybody through the corrupt Afghan government. And I'm not saying, we should fund the Taliban government indefinitely or anything like that, but if, let's say, there are accounts that are in the name of the Afghan government, now that the Afghan government is the Taliban, maybe they should just have control of those accounts. And I also don't think the U.S. should be putting pressure on the IMF like it is to prevent the Taliban from accessing those funds. Whether the Taliban take out loans with the IMF going forward, maybe I don't think it's a good idea, but it's really not on me to have, any say in that. I guess a couple other things. There is some reason to be concerned. You have a lot of international aid groups warning of an impending humanitarian crisis. Doctors Without Borders in particular says that Afghanistan's healthcare system is facing a potential collapse, and the U.S. is worrying that the UN is warning that basic services in the country are collapsing, and so any kind of sanctions or anything is going to pile on to this. And that's most of what I have on the aid group stuff. UNICEF, this is a story about the withdrawal now and just how we evacuate all these people from Afghanistan. And while we're calling it a success, UNICEF says there's a major problem reuniting hundreds of Afghan children with their families. I had to imagine that these children are at high risk of exploitation in every way. They're in countries where they don't speak the language, and it's unlikely there's a ton of people who do speak the language. There are other refugees and Afghans there who maybe do, but there's a lot of languages spoken in Afghanistan. If people are separated from their family, they could now be in Germany, South Korea, or any number of places. And in fact, this article from Reuters says that the families are in a range of countries. which it sounds pretty disturbing to me. And very, this is something I had talked about earlier in the week as well, and it's something I was very concerned about because they had already lost track of like 33% of the migrant children that they had released in the United States. And so I figured the U.S. was in no way capable to handle this, and it seems that has been proven correct. The U.S. says that 4 of its citizens have left Afghanistan over land. I guess this would have happened sometime over the past weekend, that's September 4th or 5th or something like that. Didn't say what country they exited to. Didn't say if there was like a real issue getting them out with the Taliban or not, just that 4 Americans had exited Afghanistan over land. And so it does show that there are routes out of the country. As the Kabul airport has been restored to, I think the Qataris now say 90% working order. There's a flight of 200 Americans and other foreign nationals that are going to be leaving Kabul in the coming days. And it seems that in a general sense, the Taliban are living up to the pledge they made that they will allow people with proper documentation to leave Afghanistan. Now, there are reports that this isn't happening in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, which is outside of Kabul, but does have an airport. Now, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, clarifies to say that the Taliban are allowing people with proper paperwork to leave, and says that there's an issue with some of the people who are scheduled to be on this flight who the flight isn't going to leave without don't have the proper documentation. And while this does seem like a little bit of maybe an invented issue to keep people in the country by the Taliban, I think is kind of general rules of how international order works, that you have to have proper documentation before you travel places. You're asked to show your passport and stuff as you leave and enter countries. And so people don't have that. That is going to be an issue for Afghanistan, but it's a reason maybe the U.S. should try to operate diplomatic services in Kabul or something like that to give people access to get the proper documentation. Yeah, so, the U.S., at least the government, says the Taliban are continuing to allow people to leave. I guess maybe there is a little bit of a biased reason for the Biden administration to be saying that. But other than the kind of small number of American citizens that have seemed to be able to reach hawkish members of Congress and have conversations, there aren't that many people in Kabul who are U.S. citizens who are still looking to leave the country. There are one more story on Afghanistan I want to talk about. Actually, this occurred in Pakistan, but I think it's pretty relevant. And that is 3 Pakistani soldiers were killed in a suicide attack, and they were killed by members of the Taliban. The reason this is important is the Taliban refugees in Afghanistan make up the backbone of the Islamic State Khorasan faction that carried out the terrorist attack at the Kabul airport. And so many hawks in the United States are trying to point to Afghanistan and that terrorist attack to show an example of, look, if you let the Taliban in charge, there's some like unique capacity for terrorism to exist. And this clearly isn't the case, as the U.S. ally Pakistan is right across the border, and they can't control their own terrorism problems either. And that's not because, the Taliban are in charge of Pakistan. All right, moving on to the Afghanistan news, where just this week we had Iran's new foreign minister, or the spokesperson, saying that Tehran will definitely re-enter indirect negotiations, the talks in Vienna, with the U.S. to revive the Iran nuclear deal, and didn't set a specific date. But currently the talks have been on hold since June 20th. Now, the reason for this is Iran, kind of like the United States, has a process where they elect a president, but then the current president has lamed up for a little bit, and then the new president comes in and starts putting together their cabinet and everything like that. And so I think the Iranians just had their new foreign minister put in place pretty recently, and the new administration is still taking hold. There's a really good article by Mohammed Sahimi that we ran at antiwar.com. I really recommend checking that out, where he breaks down the Iranian government a little bit, and does say that the people in the foreign ministry do have experience at negotiating and dealing with Americans. And so this was potentially a bright light in the Iranian administration, that they were going to be able to work with the U.S. Now, we have this statement, but the Iranians also said that they're not going to come back to talks because of pressure from the U.S. And just last week, we had the U.S. add sanctions to Iran. And so even if it's just a public perception thing where the Iranians don't want to appear being forced back to the Vienna talks by additional U.S. sanctions, because if that's the lesson that the U.S. learns, they're just going to sanction Iran forever, this could stall how, when talks actually take place. Now, this is important because the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. is getting closer to giving up on the Iran nuclear deal, from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He writes, in Germany, Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned the U.S. is getting closer to giving up on the Iran nuclear deal known as the JCPOA. I'm not going to put a date on it, Blinken said, but we are getting closer to the point at which a strict return to compliance with the JCPOA does not reproduce benefits that the original agreement achieved. Blinken's comments came a day after the International Atomic Energy Agency falsely claimed that Iran's very small nuclear stockpile is 60% enriched uranium is rapidly growing. So I'll get into the IAEA statement in a minute, but to stay focused for a second here on Blinken's statement and just talk about how disturbing this is, where he says that, we're getting closer to that point, but won't put a day on the table if the U.S. is going to continue any kind of provocative actions, or let's say Israel now sees that there is a end date, and if they could somehow drag out the hostilities between the U.S. and Tehran by carrying out maybe some kind of assassination within Iran, then they can make it so the Iranians won't enter negotiations for another month, and by that time the U.S. will have decided that they're not going to negotiate at all. I think that's a real risk that we face right here with this Blinken statement, and also just how misunderstanding of the agreement he is, saying that it's not going to reproduce the original benefits if Iran returns to compliance with the agreement, because the agreement, no matter what, does prevent Iran from building a nuclear bomb and has a IAEA inspection team there to make sure whatever Iran is doing with their nuclear program is going to be reported and monitored. And so Blinken, seeing that there's, maybe going to be less benefits by getting into the deal in the future, makes me think he's already calculating that the benefits are already on the decline. And so, at this point, the State Department may not even be that interested, unfortunately, in negotiating with the Iranians on getting back into the deal. All right, so to talk real quickly about Israel, because we had a statement from the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff said in an interview on Monday that plans to attack Iran have been greatly accelerated. And so if this is the case, you could have, really two issues here. One, Iran interprets it as a threat. And if they do that, then, they're not going to want to negotiate with the U.S. That's what they're saying publicly, that they're not going to be intimidated into negotiations. Or number two, Israel is really moving forward and looking to carry out some kind of attack in Iran in the near future. And if that is the case, it'll likely, extend the amount of time that the Iranians are unwilling to negotiate for several weeks, if not months. And that, again, could back us up past the time that the U.S. is willing to talk with the Iranians. Recently, we had reports from the IAEA that there are equipment on the outside of one of Iran's nuclear facilities outside of Tehran was damaged. This was in a Israeli attack on the building, likely hit with a drone. Iran had initially downplayed it, but rather did admit and said that it was Israel that had carried out a drone that hit this building. One of the IAEA cameras were destroyed, and another one was badly damaged in the attack. All right, now let's get into the false claims by the IAEA, which again is the UN watchdog group for nuclear weapons. There has been a change in the leadership of the IAEA in recent years that I had thought may make the organization more susceptible to producing U.S. and Israeli propaganda, and I think this is one of the cases where they say that Iran's stockpile of 60% uranium is rapidly growing, when in reality it has grown from a very, very, very tiny amount to only a very tiny amount. The estimated stockpile today is only at 10 kilograms. They only started producing this in May, and Iran is only producing this. They may actually dilute it back down into a lower level enriched uranium because they really can't use it, but they're only doing this because of the asymmetrical economic warfare, assassinations, and sabotage attacks by the U.S. and Israel in Iran. That they're doing this to say like, hey, we could enrich our uranium to a higher percentage to show you that we can, and to be provocative and to do something in response. And that's kind of the situation, but it's certainly not a rapidly growing stockpile. And even if that stockpile does grow a little bit more, it's not like it's exactly capable of being made into nuclear weapons as is. Let's look at some stories out of Ethiopia, where the U.S. has blacklisted a Eritrean defense official, I believe their actual defense minister, over alleged human rights abuses in Tigray. The Eritrean forces did operate in Tigray in some fighting that did seem to involve a lot of war crimes, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was true. But this, sanctioning this one party to the actor is maybe a little bit exposing of the U.S. bias that I think it has for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. And that group would have been the victim of these human rights abuses, and so that's why this person is getting sanctioned. Along with the fighting in Tigray, there has been some recent atrocities reported. The Ethiopian government, which is in opposition to the TPLF, says that the TPLF killed 120 civilians in a village in the Amara region. There's reason to know that the Tigrayan forces are active in this region, as they recently raided a USAID facility there, but this particular attack, the numbers could be exaggerated, or it is, thinly sourced here, mostly coming from reports from the Tigray, or the Ethiopian government. At the same time, there have been quite a few atrocities committed, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if this was another one. There, again, is this facility, USAID facility, that was raided by the TPLF. This does have my suspicion meter very high. It's well known that USAID works hand in hand with the CIA quite often. It's jokingly referred to, but some truth to it, as being one of the most secretive U.S. agencies. And so I wonder if it's possible if this was maybe a way to smuggle weapons to the Tigrayan forces, because I didn't read reports of any casualties as they raided this facility. Elsewhere in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Rights Commission said that there was an attack that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the Tigray fighting, at least not directly, where there was 150 people of the Amaroa ethnic group that was, the ethnic group is, I'm not sure what ethnic group was actually attacked. It was in the Amara region, and the attack was carried out by either the Amara Liberation Army or the Amara Liberation Front. I'm not exactly, sure how to differentiate there, but it does seem like there was a mass casualty, and it could be that as different ethnic militias have been raised by the central government to fight the TPLF, they're going back to other regions and committing crimes. Last, in this very interesting story from Ethiopia is that Sudan reports that more than 70 boxes of weapons were seized by authorities on a flight that came into Sudan from Ethiopia. Now, a whole lot of details I wasn't able to find on this story. But it does seem that the Ethiopian government does admit that these rifles and night vision goggles were flown into Sudan. I'm not exactly sure what the number of night vision goggles to rifles is. If these are like M4s and night vision goggles, well, that seems like, maybe coup having gear, where if this is like single shot long rifles and there's 10 of those and there's 60 pair of night vision goggles, well, maybe this is like for some safari hunting expedition thing. I don't it seems in the realm of possibility if that is the case, although I am very suspicious. It also just labels them as boxes. It doesn't say if there's one gun of bots or if these are maybe crates and there's 20 guns in a box and 5 pair of night vision goggles per bots, in which case this sounds like a much larger arsenal. So a lot of interesting developments here, but the Sudanese have been accusing, not I guess directly, but at least in roundabout ways, the Ethiopian government of carrying out some kind of human rights atrocities in the Tigray region, saying that in a shared river, there's bodies of seemingly tortured Tigrayans washing up on the Sudanese shores, at least 23 bodies in total. I do know that there's like Tigrayans who do live in that region of Sudan, and so maybe these stories are being somewhat manufactured or something. I don't know. Just trying to drop as much information on this as I was able to figure out myself. One of the hard things about talking about Ethiopia in Africa in general is there's just so little good English reporting on what's happening there, and most of it is just repeating what some source said. So the Tigrayans say this, the Ethiopian government says this, the Sudanese government says this, which are all interesting, but at the same time, unless there's some journalist going out there saying, I saw 10 bodies and I believe that the Sudanese government claims, we always have to be at least a little bit skeptical that many of these stories could be manufactured. There's also a lot of other issues between Sudan and Ethiopia, including with Ethiopia's new dam that they're building. It's going to, or could at least, take a lot of the water that flows to Egypt and Sudan. And so maybe there is, reasons in Ethiopia to want more compliant government in Sudan, so they put up less of a stink about that. All right, that's where I'll wrap up for today. Hope everybody's enjoying the show. I've been putting out a lot of bonus content, at least one episode a week. So we've almost been at 4 episodes a week now. Working really hard to, grow the base of this show. And whenever y'all can hit the share button, the like button, or anything like that, it does really, help. And it's a little bit that you guys could do to match some of the lot of work that me and Will put into this. And it's really beneficial. So recommending the show, sharing the show, please do that. If you're a big fan of the show and you really like it, either consider doing your CBD shopping through Paloma Verde to help the show, or just, set up recurring donations on Patreon, subscribe, start donating some crypto. And most of the bonus shows are going up everywhere, although if I feel like I'm not going to not talk about other subjects that sometimes get your videos on YouTube taken down. So if it's like a censorship concern, they may not go on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to the show on Odyssey, on Rumble, that you got the Libertarian Institute bookmarked and all that stuff. And we'll be back with more shows next week. Of course, clips coming out all the time. Share those if you can. And we have our social media accounts on Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter.